for now. Let's listen to this thing because I'm bored.
Okay, let's dive in. Think about all the amazing work that happens out there. Building crucial open source software, maybe doing really groundbreaking research, or tackling these huge planet-sized problems like climate change.
Yeah, stuff that clearly creates massive positive value, ripples
That's
outwards.
like it feels valuable, right?
Yeah.
But then you try to put like a normal price tag on it, or measure that good really precisely,
Hmm.
or even just fund it through the usual market ways. It's incredibly hard.
It really is, because often the impact is so spread out, everyone kind of benefits, but nobody specific owns it in a way you can easily sell.
That's the classic public goods problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
Funding things where the value isn't easily captured. How do you incentivize that? How do you reward it?
Precisely. And that's what we're really digging into today.
Yeah, this deep dive is all about exploring some pretty cutting edge ideas, mostly coming out of the crypto economic space, actually, trying to build new ways to tackle this exact challenge.
Things like impact certificates, hypercerts, impact evaluators.
Right. These are concepts aiming to create totally new mechanisms, maybe even, markets, to recognize that positive impact, quantify it, and maybe reward it after it's already happened.
Yeah,
Mind you, we've been on this before I even was able to do any research into this. I just happened upon this. So, big brain right here.
we've really gone through the source material here, pulled together insights from discussions about funding the commons, looked deep into how impact certificates and hypercerts are supposed to work, and explored the thinking behind these impact evaluators.
So our mission here is basically to give you a shortcut, to help you get your head around this complex, honestly pretty fascinating corner of using tech for good. We'll break down the core ideas, look at why making markets for impact could be a good thing,
Look at the actual mechanisms proposed.
and also be really honest about the challenges. Because there are definitely some big hurdles these ideas face. It's about understanding this frontier of trying to value good work.
What's really interesting, I think, is just that attempt to bridge the gap. Taking
Yeah.
this like abstract positive thing, impact, and trying to make it more concrete. Something you can track, attribute,
And then maybe even trade.
potentially, yeah.
Okay, so let's start right there. The sort of fundamental piece seems to be this idea of bottling impact. What do they mean by that?
Right. So the core idea is when someone, a person, an organization, whatever, does something that creates a positive impact, something good for the world or a community,
Mm-hmm.
instead of that good thing just happening and everyone sort of enjoying it for free, implicitly, the person who created it can conceptually intercept it. They bottle it up.
Bottle it up, like capture the good deed somehow, turn it into a unit.
Exactly that. Turn it into a transferable unit. Often this is represented digitally, like a certificate or a token. So the person or group who did the good thing now holds this digital thing that represents a claim on that specific piece of positive impact they created.
Okay, so you capture the good deed in a sort of digital container. And the sources use this really interesting metaphor for the value of that container. They say it's like fine wine, not fine art. What's that about?
Yeah, that metaphor is trying to highlight a really key difference. It's about how the value is supposed to work compared to, say, a collectible NFT or a painting.
Okay.
With fine art, a lot of the value is just in holding it, right? It's scarcity, it's history. But with these impact certificates, the idea is the value gets realized when someone actually consumes the impact.
Consumes it, like drinks the wine.
Kind of, yeah, metaphorically speaking. At some point, someone holding that certificate is meant to consume the impact it represents. Maybe they retire the certificate, burn the token, whatever the mechanism is. That act signifies they are the ones who ultimately valued or maybe benefited from that specific good work.
Okay, so the consumption, the drinking, is what ultimately gives it value, not just holding it like a collectible.
That's the theory. Unlike a painting that might just hang on a wall.
Got it. So bottling is step one, make a tradable unit, and then creating markets around these units. The sources argue this has several potential upsides. What are some of the big ones?
Well, a major one is enabling ex post evaluation and funding, meaning after the fact. Right. Think about traditional charity. You often donate upfront based on a promise, a plan.
Yeah, you hope they do good work.
Right. Markets for impact certificates allow funding or rewards to happen after the impact has actually been observed and hopefully verified. You just have way more information to judge success when you can see the results.
So you're rewarding what actually happened, not just good intentions. That seems pretty significant.
It really shifts the dynamic. Another potential benefit is how markets can integrate diffused information.
What do you mean by that?
Markets are generally pretty good at pulling together scattered bits of knowledge from lots of different people.
Okay.
So individuals out there who might have specific insight into a product's real value, maybe they actually use the open source tool, or they live near the reforested area. They can express that knowledge by buying or selling the impact certificates. Their actions influence the price.
Ah, so the market price itself starts to reflect this sort of collective wisdom about the impact's actual value. Like,
One thing that immediately comes to mind with that, though, is if there is any need for the user to actually purchase something in order to distribute that impact or to even like give value to that impact, it goes back to the same thing of the like charity, like the altruism that is required to give charity. Like, unless there's something that makes somebody do that, or if it's just done for them, not necessarily without them knowing, but like kind of on the back end, the individual typically will not do that. I don't know. That's more on like the social side of things, but it that immediately kind of red flags for me. I don't know. I'm gonna let it continue.
a smarter wisdom of the crowds.
That's the idea, yeah. And that connects directly to incentivizing excellence.
How so?
Well, if these markets work well, if they can actually channel significant resources and give really big rewards for truly high impact achievements, that creates a powerful pull. It incentivizes people and teams to actively look for those high leverage opportunities.
So trying to capture some of that, ambitious energy we see in the for-profit world
Exactly.
and point it towards solving these public goods problems where normal profit motives just don't work.
That's definitely the ambition, to unlock that kind of innovative drive for areas that are currently underfunded or overlooked. And related to that is this idea of social proof through consumption.
Chemical proof.
Yeah, when people actually buy these certificates and then consume them, take them out of circulation, it's a public signal. It shows others that, hey, people actually value this underlying impact. It can build trust, build a track record for the projects.
Makes sense. And there was also a point about continuity of the current practice. That sounded a bit subtle.
Yeah, it is a bit subtle, but maybe important for getting people on board. Right now, when you donate to a charity or contribute code, you could say the impact is sort of implicitly consumed right away, by you or by the beneficiaries.
Okay.
Making consumption an explicit action with a certificate gives you a clearer choice. You can consume it now, like you might implicitly do today, or you can bottle it, hold it, maybe sell it later. It feels like less of a radical break from how people already think about contributing and valuing good work.
Okay, so we've got the basic idea.
So in this proposed framework, somebody could purchase this impact token that is representative of whatever work that they're funding, and then they're able to resell that. And then consumption does what exactly? I need to reread things and just read actually the rest of these. Or I can just ask it. Actually, interactive mode, 0652. Let's see how this works. I'm actually kind of curious if I can actually do this.
Okay, let's dive in. Think about all the amazing work that happens out there, building crucial open source software, maybe doing really groundbreaking research, or tackling these huge planet-sized problems like climate change.
Yeah, stuff that clearly creates
Bottle impact, trade it. And the reasons why that might be useful. Better evaluation, pooling knowledge, stronger incentives. But how do these systems actually work? Let's get into the mechanics. Impact evaluators seem key here.
They really are positioned as the critical infrastructure. These are the systems designed to ideally objectively measure impact and then align the rewards based on verifiable data. They generally run on a core loop: measure, evaluate, and reward.
Okay, walk us through that loop. Measure, evaluate, reward.
So first, measure. The system needs to pull in information from the real world that's relevant to the impact you care about. Could be code commits, could be sensor data, satellite images, survey results, whatever.
Okay.
Raw data in.
Then evaluate. It takes that raw information and translates it into some kind of score or assessment against a pre-agreed goal, a key performance indicator, a KPI.
Right. How much progress did we make towards the goal?
Exactly. And third, reward. based on that evaluation score, it translates the impact into a payout, often using crypto economic tools, maybe distributing tokens or stablecoins based on the measured success.
Data in, assessed against a goal, payment out based on the result.
Okay, but that evaluate step, that sounds like where the magic or maybe the trouble happens, especially for complex things, right? Like research breakthroughs or social change. It's not always just
I'm sure
numbers.
that's
That is
really
absolutely the
uphill.
crux of it. And
So
it's a
sorry.
huge challenge. For those really nuanced outcomes, things that aren't just easily counted, the sources suggest you might need human judgment involved. You might need, like, judges in the loop.
Ah, and as soon as you say human judgment.
Yep. Complexity alert. How do you keep it objective? How do you avoid bias?
Complexity
Who picks the
alert is
judges?
crazy.
Right, all those issues.
It's a major design problem. The sources definitely highlight this. You know, AI could potentially automate some evaluation, but that brings its own set of potential biases and failure modes.
So what's the answer then?
Well, the thinking seems to be you have to iterate. You probably won't get the evaluation mechanism perfect right away. You need to be prepared to refine it, upgrade the rules, tweak the metrics based on whether they're actually incentivizing the right kind of impact, not just something easy.
I mean, the thing that immediately comes to mind for me is that impact itself, like the purchase of whatever this token is kind of the feedback, but then that goes into less of the retroactive compensation and more of the I mean, it is still the retroactive compensation, though. It's like people aren't going to purchase this token unless something has been done in this theoretical world where people want to purchase things that have already been done on the charity side of things. I guess, honestly, the more I think about it, the more that kind of concept grows on me. Like, it's you're paying for a charitable action that's already been done, perhaps, call it that, and then maybe you can write it off in your taxes, or, like, I don't know, something like that would potentially be how that's systemically implemented. I'm just going to let it continue.
Easy to game or measure.
So getting those metrics and the whole evaluation process right is absolutely crucial and, yeah, probably really hard.
Totally. Get it wrong, and you could end up with really bad unintended consequences. Rewarding quantity over quality, rewarding things that look good on paper but aren't actually helpful,
Right.
or worse.
Okay, but assuming you can get it reasonably right, what's the potential power of these evaluators, especially linked with crypto?
The potential is applying really high leverage to big problems.
Yeah.
If you design the reward structures cleverly, maybe making them super linear with impact.
Super linear. Meaning,
like, achieving twice the impact doesn't just get you twice the reward, maybe it gets you 4 times or 10 times the reward. Disproportionately larger reward for bigger breakthroughs. If you can do that, you can potentially shift the whole equilibrium of a system. You can unlock much, much greater contributions than if the rewards just scaled linearly. It creates this positive feedback loop where big success attracts even more resources and effort.
can you give us some concrete examples? What might this look like?
Sure. The sources mention things like using evaluators in decentralized networks. For instance, measuring and rewarding the useful storage capacity or data retrieval speed provided to a network like Filecoin. Not just raw capacity, but capacity that actually being used productively.
Okay, that makes sense. Verifiable data.
Another powerful example is rewarding environmental outcomes. Imagine using satellite imagery, maybe from Landsat or similar sources, to automatically verify increases in forest cover in a particular region.
Wow.
And then the evaluator could automatically distribute rewards, maybe carbon credits represented as tokens, or just funds directly to the organizations or even countries responsible for that verified reforestation.
Yeah, that's a compelling vision. Okay, so evaluators are one key piece. The source also talked about coordinating work, especially in these decentralized ecosystems, using things like OKRs and bounties. How does that fit in?
Right. So in a lot of these decentralized systems or commons, you have tons of valuable work being done by independent people, independent teams. They're not all employees of one company.
Right, it's distributed.
Exactly. But their work benefits the whole ecosystem. It might make the core protocol more valuable or improve the shared resource, but it's not tied to one company's payroll.
So you need ways to steer that distributed effort.
Precisely. Towards common goals. So networked OKRs, objectives, and key results are proposed as one way, setting clear ecosystem-wide goals that require different groups and individuals to collaborate.
Like a shared mission for the whole network.
Sort of, yeah, with measurable targets. And then rewards are tied to hitting those shared milestones for the whole network.
Okay, like everyone pulling in the same direction gets rewarded when the goal is reached.
That's the idea. And then you have milestone bounties, which are more specific, paying for discrete, well-defined achievements within the ecosystem. This isn't a totally new idea, of course. We've seen versions of this in crypto for a while.
Yeah, like bug bounties, right? Find a security flaw, get paid.
Exactly. HackerOne is mentioned as a kind of precedent there. Or platforms like Gitcoin, which has funded tons of open source work through bounties and grants.
And foundations, like the Ethereum Foundation, giving grants for specific protocol improvements.
Right, those are all examples of directing resources towards specific needed contributions. And that funding can be upfront, like working capital based on expected impact, or it can be retroactive rewarding impact that's already been delivered.
Okay, so we've got these building blocks. The certificates, the market idea, the evaluators, the coordination tools like OKRs and bounties. But man, building this stuff for real sounds incredibly complex. What are the biggest hurdles? The sources must have dug into the challenges.
Oh, absolutely. And they are significant hurdles. Maybe the most fundamental one is verifiability and trust.
How do you know the impact is real?
Exactly. If I'm buying an impact certificate that claims, say, 100 tons of carbon were sequestered, how do I trust that? How can I verify it actually happened? Especially if it's something complex or long-term.
You'd need...
I mean, for real life, that becomes quite difficult, and having like sensors and shit maybe. In education, as I've already proposed, it could potentially be as simple as just letting the student's aptitude and the changes within the student's education and or their profile kind of indicate how the content itself has impacted them. I think it becomes quite simple when it's that closed of a loop, but on more open loop things I believe this is about to discuss, it does get quite minute and funky, let's call it that.
really robust proof, right? Maybe independent auditors or trusted organizations that issue the certificates.
That seems essential. And beyond just verifying individual claims, you need to build generalized trust in the whole system. People need to trust the market infrastructure itself. Kind of like how they trust a stock exchange without personally verifying every single company's assets. That takes time, careful design, maybe regulation, and just a track record of things working reliably.
Okay, trust and verification, big one. What else? There was something about clear ownership of rights. That sounds messy.
It's super tricky, especially for public goods or highly collaborative projects. Think about open source again. Many people contribute code, documentation, testing.
Right.
If that project generates positive impact that gets bottled into certificates, who gets to claim ownership of that impact? Who has the right to issue the certificates and benefit from them?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see that getting really contentious really fast. Everyone pointing fingers saying, my contribution was bigger.
It absolutely could. The sources warn this could create really unhealthy adversarial dynamics. People might be incentivized to overstate their own role and downplay others, which is obviously terrible for collaboration.
So how do you even begin to tackle that one?
Well,
in
the
advance?
consensus seems to be you have to address it explicitly, right up front.
Yep.
People contributing need to have clear agreements about how impact attribution and potential rewards will be shared. It's kind of analogous to how startup co-founders need to agree on their equity splits early on before things get complicated.
Makes sense. Formalize it early.
And this is actually where specific tools like hypercerts come in. They're mentioned as being designed specifically with this problem in mind.
One thing that I am quite fond of is the concept that, potentially only like everybody's time is worth the exact amount. Like implementing a time aspect into this. Everybody's time is worth the same amount at the very beginning, given that all of our time is finite, and potentially putting that into perspective with adding value based on experience. And that the experience itself adds value to one's time. The current education system does this through the concept of degrees. Like, if you have more of a degree or you have more experience in the field, you are paid more purely because your time is worth more. In the same sense, the time aspect and the experience aspect, if both can be quantified, I know time obviously can be quantified. We have amazing clocking systems, but both the time and the experience getting quantified and making some form of multiplier for how well that lines up onto impact. The more experience you have, the more you've done to have a higher ability to impact, the more your impact, like the easier, not easier, you just get an impact multiplier, right? That's kind of how I'm thinking of it. So potentially working into that, akin to the subscriber in like all of these networked social media platforms. By having higher subscriber counts, they innately have a higher impact. They have more of a platform. Not to say that that is most definitely a good metric of value, but of impact. So it's like of anything that that person works on, potentially they could state to an extent that they have a higher impact, and therefore, stuff like that can be figured out. But I think that will definitely come into play. Our time is finite.
Okay. So hypercerts are like a special kind of impact certificate.
You could think of it that way, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A more sophisticated version, maybe. They're designed with built-in structures like dimensions that can explicitly attribute the impact claim to multiple contributors, define the scope of the work, the time frame, etc., all within the certificate itself. The goal is to bake that multi-party ownership right into the data structure.
Interesting. So trying to solve the ownership problem technically. What about the incentives overall? Markets are powerful, but they can push things in weird directions sometimes.
That's definitely a major concern raised. The risk is that these markets might accidentally encourage people to focus on work that's just easy to measure and package into a certificate.
Rather than the work that's actually most impactful, but maybe harder to quantify or verify.
Precisely. You might optimize for certifiability instead of actual value. There's also a question mark around how well these markets incentivize really risky blue sky projects. Projects with a small chance of a massive payoff.
Why is that?
Because the value of an impact certificate is sort of theoretically capped by the value of the impact itself, right? It can't go below zero impact. This might mean it doesn't attract the same kind of highly speculative investment that fuels some high-risk, high-reward ventures in traditional equity markets, where the upside potential is theoretically unlimited.
Okay. That's an interesting point. And then, for any of this to actually get off the ground, you need people to buy in. The sources mentioned acceptance and incrementalism.
Yeah, you can't just drop a totally new system like this onto the world and expect everyone to adopt it overnight. It needs to be acceptable to the people and organizations already working in these spaces, charities, nonprofits, researchers.
Right, you don't want to alienate them.
Exactly. The sources warn against creating situations that feel unfair. Like, imagine a charity got donations up front to do Project X. Then later, someone else comes along, measures the impact of Project X, issues certificates for it, and sells them. The original charity might feel like they're being asked to get paid twice for the same work, or that someone else is profiting off their donated effort. That could create real friction.
Yeah, bad feeling.
So the recommendation seems to be build these systems incrementally. Start small, maybe in specific niches where the benefits are clear and the conflicts are minimal. Build trust and demonstrate value step by step.
That makes sense. There's also just the basic challenge of complexity and understanding.
Totally. These concepts are pretty abstract. Impact certificates, evaluators, crypto economics. It's not simple stuff.
Right.
So building really good, intuitive user interfaces and clearly communicating how these markets and tools actually function, that's going to be crucial. People need to understand it, to trust it, and participate.
School.
And the sources are pretty upfront that this could be a real shakeup, right?
Yes. They acknowledge that moving towards explicit market-driven ways of funding public goods is potentially a massive shift. It's very different from traditional philanthropy or government grants. And the full effects, the unknown consequences on the existing ecosystem, we don't really know yet.
So proceed with caution, basically.
Definitely. It requires an experimental mindset. And then there's one last, almost philosophical point they raise about replaceability.
Replaceability? What's that?
It comes back to trying to precisely quantify an individual's impact, especially within a large collaborative system like an open source project or a scientific field. When you try to measure the specific impact of your contribution, it kind of forces the question, what was the true marginal impact? If you hadn't done that specific piece of work, would someone else in that big system have eventually done something similar anyway? Would the gap have been filled?
So making impact explicit might make individual contributions feel less unique, or maybe less valuable than we intuitively feel they are.
It could introduce that kind of thinking, yeah. Potentially dampen a bit of optimism about individual effort. However, the counterpoint raised is that many people contributing to public goods operate on what you might call an altruism budget, meaning they're committed to contributing a certain amount of time or effort regardless, driven by values, not just by the calculated marginal return on their specific action. So while the system introduces this sort of explicit calculation, it might not completely override those deeper altruistic motivations.
Okay, that's a fascinating tension. So we've covered the concepts,
One thing that immediately comes to mind, though, is that if you do it earlier on in the platform's like growth, especially with open source things, the fact that it was done earlier on should have a higher impact than it being done later on. So it would incentivize getting things done instead of procrastinating them. Because like the more you do earlier on, it's akin to potentially investing in the platform, but you're investing your time and your efforts. So it's almost the first come first serve mentality, specifically within education. I would argue that on the plagiarism topic is a very good example of this. It is first come first serve for any idea. For intellectual property, it is first come first serve because it's currently just to be able to give people a protection. And that is debatable, whether or not that use of intellectual property is the best. But my theory on where this could potentially lead is a level of development first come, first serve. So say I have one idea for an open source product, and I just write down the idea on a piece of paper, and I go and throw that into the patent office or whatever of this new intellectual property system that's based on impact. That very non-developed idea is not going to have as much impact, but it was you who first immediately had that idea. You publicized that idea. Somebody comes in and works on that, builds it out significantly, potentially separated from you, and goes and submits that. What wasn't novel was, well, even if it was novel, the thing that you made was still first come, first serve, so you should be compensated for that. So potentially some argument could occur that it's like, yes, this portion of it, even though you were not directly inspired by me, sorry, I kind of got this first, that could potentially occur, and then a potential collaboration opportunity could even come out of that in a more idealistic society. In reality, potentially what could or would occur is people brute forcing idea generation, and at that point that would just break the copyright system, which is where my concept would come in, and it's first come first serve, maybe with a threshold of development. And I mean that's akin to what the patents already do. You already have to be developed, and then you are given a set amount of time to develop it further, and then if that does not work, then that falls through. So potentially it would also be just that. So it's like we use that same system and put in metrics where it's just like, yeah, if you don't get to this point in development, then this idea is fair game for anybody else who just tried to submit the same thing. Like a new way of doing the provisional patents, potentially. Just to make it such that it's so much easier to be interoperable. We don't need as much competition, especially if more people are going to be going in for the same pursuit and are both at a very similar stage of development. Co-development can occur plentifully. I'm a big supporter of may the best platform win. I'm likely going to be co-developing with some other social media platforms, and honestly, may the best platform win. I sure as hell hope that the best platform, even if it's not mine, wins. I genuinely want this to be impactful, so I want the things that I make to be impactful. It doesn't necessarily just have to be in my business. It doesn't have to be my name on it. My work can work in other people's businesses, like stuff like that. That's why I really enjoy open source. There was a really good analogy to Substack writing development, that it being a portfolio career. I think the same can be done for open source, where you're building these maybe standard libraries for AI agents, and as you build out your portfolio of that, it's shared publicly, and then it just works on an impact system. So it's like if your portfolio had so much impact integrated into other people's things, then you get compensated for that. I really enjoy that. So it's like it incentivizes work being put in early. I don't know. I'm gonna let them finish. I think there's still a few more talking points, but yeah.
Mechanisms and some really significant hurdles. But despite all those challenges, it sounds like there's still a lot of excitement about the potential here.
Oh,
No,
absolutely.
we're excited.
There is. The underlying idea is powerful. Using these crypto-economic tools offers potentially new ways to coordinate large groups of people, find sustainable funding for vital public goods that we currently struggle to support, and maybe even tackle huge global problems by aligning incentives with outcomes much more effectively than we can now.
And it feels really connected to other things happening,
Yeah.
like the evolution of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations.
Exactly. As DAOs try to do more complex things than just, say, holding treasury funds, they run into these same problems. How do we coordinate work? How do we value different contributions? How do we make collective decisions effectively? These impact mechanisms could become really important tools for them.
So it's clear this is very much still experimental territory. People are actively building, testing, debating.
Definitely. It's not a solved problem by any means. The concepts are being sharpened, different implementations are being tried out, and the community is learning and iterating on how best to design these systems to actually deliver positive results and avoid those pitfalls we talked about.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up for you, the listener. We've unpacked impact certificates, this idea of bottling up good work into a tradable unit, valued more like fine wine to be consumed than fine art to be held.
We looked at hypercerts as a more structured version, trying to handle the complexity of public goods and multiple contributors.
We explored impact evaluators, those crucial systems for measure, evaluate, reward, using data, maybe human judgment, to quantify progress and trigger payouts.
And we touched on networked OKRs and milestone bounties as ways to coordinate all that distributed effort towards common goals.
At their core, these are all really ambitious attempts, aren't they? Trying to build new infrastructure to quantify and incentivize doing good in a way that's much more explicit, maybe more scalable, possibly more efficient than our traditional models.
Yeah, they represent a potential paradigm shift.
And it really makes you think, doesn't it? As we move into a world where work and value creation are becoming more complex, more decentralized, how might actually measuring and rewarding impact explicitly? How might that change things? Not just what work gets done, but maybe even why people decide to do it in the first place.
Which brings up a really critical final thought, maybe for you to ponder. If we actually want these systems to genuinely benefit the world, if we want them to be more than just another layer of financial games, what are the absolute most important things we have to get right? Is it the verification?
Yep.
Is it the ownership structures? Is it nailing the incentive design? What's the one linchpin that, if it fails, the whole promise collapses?
Yes, all of the above. I think it's going to be definitely the incentives, though. I believe I don't know if I stated this in the earlier video, but the analogy of the snake population. I believe I did. But it's like similar to the gun buyback, or like IEDs, or like where I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like there was a government that was trying to get them off the streets, and they offered a set value for the buyback. And people would just go out and manufacture these weapons and bring them in and sell them for profit to the government. But they were just like $10 pieces of plywood with some gunpowder and whatever. Like, I don't know. Like, incentives carry the entire thing, or they break it. We shall see. Let's get this bread. I'm definitely going to be applying for that fellowship. I'm so excited. Dude, that would be so fun to go up to Iceland. But yeah. Peace out, y'all. I'm not going to be getting the editing done tonight. I'm just going to post this video. I'll post the full thing to Patreon. Subscribe. When I get around to editing it. Oh, no. The laziness. Peace out, y'all.